Here we go, another episode of Adventures in DevOps. Jillian, thank you for joining me as co-host today.
Hello.
Warren is off on vacation, getting some much-needed rest and relaxation. And also joining us today, Vernon Keenan from Salesforce DevOps. Welcome, Vernon.
Thank you. It's great being here. Hope I can share some insights.
Dude, I'm pretty sure you can, because I'm particularly excited about this because it's not very often that I get to hang out and talk with people who have been doing this longer than I have. So not trying to throw out your age or anything, but I feel like,
Yeah.
I take it as a badge of honor that I've been doing it this long. And so when I meet someone who's been doing it similarly, I'm excited.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I've been doing it for 45 years now. That's quite a while. Started my career at Northwestern University, working in the medical school, and then had the great chance to work at Genentech in the early days. And that was
That's neat. What were you doing there?
I was doing clinical research. So I was actually one of the first people to see the results of the clinical trials. Because I was doing data analysis, and we used a product called SAS. And of course, because we were Genentech and we thought we could do anything, we decided to write our own clinical research product.
Right? How hard could it be?
I did that one too.
Yeah, that was a lesson in humility, right? Because we learned that Oracle did a much better job at that particular product.
The God's part to strike down some hubris, so I'm sure it was all fine.
Yeah. I mean, it still happens all the time. I talk to enterprises all the time, and people still waste their time doing custom projects they could buy out there.
I think it's one of those. It's one of those lessons that you can't teach anyone. They just have to learn it themselves.
Yeah. I mean, because you're so conceived, you know that you think your requirements are so unique. You think your requirements are special. You think that your talents and your abilities are special. Well, turns out they're not generally, because usually what happens is a software company is going to find somebody who is much better at those qualities than you are, because they're going to produce it for 10 times as many people. And they're going to make 10 times as much profit. So they have as much, 10 times as much motivation to find the right people. So, I got started there, and then I had a fascinating early career. I was at I was at Oracle, and actually Mark Benioff himself hired me there, and I was working for him. And I had the unique experience of going into the corporate visit center all the time, and I was basically just lying my butt off all the time, drawing boxes on the board, putting arrows, talking to the CEO of various global companies, saying, "Yeah, we can do this, we can do that. We look at this application server; it puts everything together." And it was all. It wasn't true. It wasn't true. That was what I call.
Say it isn't so.
That's what I call the first act of enterprise software. We basically said everything was gonna work, and then it didn't.
Right, like first act, like a Shakespearean tragedy, where you know what acts 2 and 3 are going to be like.
Well, yeah, I mean, Act 2, I think, was the data lake, data warehouse era, where we tried to put everything into like a secondary storage area, and we still didn't get transformation. We still didn't get new capabilities out of that, and hopefully we're in the third act now, where maybe things will come
AI
together.
is just going to do it for us. That's what I think.
Well, that's my thesis
I don't even need
as well.
to structure my data anymore. Who needs even MongoDB when I've got AI?
Well, we could delve into that a little later, I guess. But
Okay.
But yes, so my friendship with Mark Benioff is kind of interesting because I recently renewed it. It was fascinating because I wrote a blog post that got his attention. It said why Salesforce Trailblazers don't care about AI, and my phone started blowing up, and I have renewed my friendship with Mark. So So
So,
that's interesting as well.
so what's your take on that? Why don't they care?
Well, the reason was because they didn't actually make it available in the product. So the thing about Salesforce that I liked as like I got my first Salesforce account actually way back in 1999. And I've been using it, on and off, and I actually built my own business on it about starting in 2012. Created a whole enterprise product for telecom that I used in my business. And the reason why I thought that the Trailblazer community was so active and so forthcoming with tips and tricks and like techniques and sharing and things like that was because the SaaS pricing model basically gave you all you could eat for a fixed price. Mm-hmm. So any Trailblazer would be able to like go to the setup menu and search for a new feature, for example, and then they could just like start trying it out. So those capabilities were always in there. But because AI seems to be different, mainly in terms of the cost that the companies have to burden to provide it, they didn't do that. They made you order a product. So while they were all carping and saying AI this and AI that, like 95% of the Trailblazers out there couldn't get access to it. So that was my point. And the thing that was a fascinating story actually is that what happened was Mark read that. They sent me the keynote, and I actually was able to like edit the keynote and tell them what they should fix. And,
Oh, wow.
And this was like 3 days before Dreamforce. And they I sent it back to them. They put all the changes in. They changed product timelines, accelerated timelines, and just made a bunch of people. What happens when the CEO says do things to a bunch of people they weren't expecting to do things like over the weekend. And
my long holiday weekend, I don't like that at all.
That's right. It's gone. It's like, plus you got all the stress of Dreamforce coming up, all the prep, and now they got to change all the products. So they changed it. They actually included a free version of their new Agentforce thing in a new go-to-market version of their product they call Foundations, which is kind of like you can just buy it with a credit card as opposed to dealing with one of their account executives.
Oh, nice.
So they actually changed the product. Not sure how effective that was, but kind of just like in any situation, what it did, it just peeled the onion a little bit and revealed another problem underneath, which is how are they going to charge for it? So they haven't really figured it out yet, is the answer. So there's a lot of confusion out there in the Salesforce world as to how they're going to pay for it, all this magical AI stuff.
For sure.
Mark keeps talking about.
For sure.
So get back to the SaaS DevOps thing. I'll just tell my story a little bit more. So like I said, I was in telecom. I had this, I had built an actual tax engine on the Salesforce platform for telecom, which is, you can imagine, is pretty complex. And I had an opportunity to kind of like leverage that tax engine outside of telecom. And so I realized that Salesforce was kind of a bad platform for that because of its performance characteristics. Like if you're going to have an API service, you don't want to run it off of Salesforce. Basically, there's just too much overhead, too many constraints. So I personally got into more of, I think, your world of DevOps, kind of like the Go Kubernetes world. And I implemented all of my stuff, my new API, my new database, everything with Go, Kubernetes. It was beautiful, scalable, it's like 100 times faster than Salesforce. And so I had that, but, business-wise, that project didn't go anywhere. So I had all this wonderful new DevOps knowledge, plus being the Salesforce expert. So I turned my attention back to Salesforce. And then I realized that they were in deep, deep, deep trouble when it came to release management. Basically, what happened was Salesforce had an initiative in the late 2010s. It was called the SFDX initiatives. where they essentially created a command line interface to their metadata API. And this enabled developers to pull configurations out of a Salesforce org and put them into a Git repository. So now this is starting to sound a little bit more like a regular DevOps workflow, right?
Right.
Where you have a repository, you have a somewhat kind of a source of truth, and then you're able to deploy it. Again, in some fashion, maybe to another org, or you're changing the deployment and you're redeploying it to add a capability, fix an error, or something like that. So it turns out that the SFDX effort was noble and was good, and actually was kind of sufficient to begin the DevOps movement within Salesforce. And so what happened was all these end users basically started to try to figure out how to use this SFDX tool to manipulate Salesforce. Mm-hmm. And then at the same time, a group of companies, and I'll name a few of them. The leaders are Capado, and back then Flowsome, and another one that's come out is Gearset. And all of these companies, what they did is they kind of operationalized that API, or that CLI interface that Salesforce had provided end users, and put a low-code clicky interface on top of that capability, so that Salesforce admins and other folks who were accustomed to a low-code interface could start to do release management in a more rigorous way using tools like Git or VS Code or things like that to, have a more kind of rigorous development effort. But at the same time, it was still constrained a lot by the way that Salesforce works. So, like, here's a crazy thing. I mentioned this metadata API, right? And you'd think that this metadata API would let you to actually pull all the information out of a Salesforce org so that you could reproduce it, like right. Maybe copy it to another org or something like that. Turns out that there is neglect within Salesforce, the company, to implementing the metadata API. So they have definitely a priority to get the low code interfaces out there first. So they actually recognize that they've gone to the point now where it's a real problem. And some of these DevOps companies, another one I'll mention is Elements Cloud, and they're interesting because they have all kinds of proprietary ways to go into the Salesforce org and get out that metadata that's not available through the API. So this kind of gets into a central theme that I have all the time when I'm talking about SaaS DevOps and Salesforce DevOps, which is that the way these things work is that you kind of have to treat the subject system, like the Salesforce org that you're updating, or the org that you're reading or copying. You have to kind of treat that thing like a living system where there's no source of truth, really, right, other than the state of the thing that it's running in now. And that's really quite problematic, because you have to, in order to understand if you can produce a deployment that's going to work, it's going to go through and not have any errors, you essentially have to, the only way to do that is to submit it to the org and see if any errors come out. So you can imagine how slow that would be on an iterative basis and how frustrating. And this actually gets back to a complaint that Salesforce developers in the community have about working with Salesforce, which is that it's very slow. It can, as somebody who went from Go to Apex, Apex is the development language, is this Java-like language they have for Salesforce. So like with Go, I could just, compile things, hit, recompile or whatever, Go, and I'd have like 10 seconds between a coding change and being able to see if it worked. With Salesforce, that can go out to maybe 2 or 3 minutes sometimes.
Right.
So when you submit a package to either your Scratch org or even a sandbox org for testing, it's still going to take like 90 seconds, 2 minutes for that submission to go in. So I think Salesforce developers are always complaining about this flow of work thing. And the way that you can fix that as a vendor is to do kind of what Elements is doing, which is to create what I call a very complete digital twin of your subject SaaS system within the DevOps product that you're working with. So Elements has a separate like AWS thing running where they essentially ingest all of the metadata from an org and convert it into like a graph database or some other kind of representation that they can then manipulate. And then they can use that to do something which is very essential in Salesforce, which is called impact analysis. So like if the boss says, oh, we got to have another, shipping type in the shipping module or whatever, then that thing needs to be defined in what they call a pick list in Salesforce. Mm-hmm. And when you change the pick list, though, you could actually impact a whole bunch of different things, different screens all over the place, Apex code, user interface mechanisms, and other things like that. So by having a digital twin, you're able to easily do what I call impact analysis, or change intelligence is another word they use for that. My favorite term is blast radius.
For sure.
Like when you make a change, what's the blast radius potential of that particular change? And so that's a critical, and it's just one thing, one example that you can't get out of Salesforce, and that you need a DevOps service provider to help you delve into that and to help you organize that stuff.
So let me pause you real quick right there and recap the problem here for our listeners. So
yes,
with these large enterprise style SaaSes, I think you're describing two problems here. One is you never know what the true state is. So someone with the appropriate permissions could go in, make a change to the environment, and you don't have any way of tracking that change to see what was actually impacted, aside from asking that person, hey, what'd you do? And getting their typical response, nothing. And then the other aspect of this is if you want to introduce new features or capabilities to your system, you don't have any way to create like a staging area and test your changes before you apply to production.
Correct. So those are both capabilities that DevOps products, Salesforce and SaaS DevOps products let you do. And the most popular Salesforce DevOps product is from a company called GearSet. They're in England. And the simulated deployment is the most popular feature of that product. So that's it, and it's also affordable. So like for $250 a year or whatever to get a seat for that thing it's pretty cheap. And it'll save you a ton of time. Basically, it's that iteration.
Yeah, at that price, it doesn't even need to save you more than a few minutes per year.
No, and GearSet's easy to buy too. That's another reason why they're popular. They kind of have a PLG, product-led growth concept, where they just try to make it easy to use, easy to buy. You don't have to talk to a sales rep. where with most of the other products is more like an enterprise sales loop where you got to kind of delve into dealing with somebody and then coming up with a license agreement.
Jillian, you were about to say something.
Yeah, I was just wondering who is kind of the target audience for this? Because on the one hand, we have Salesforce, which is, like a sales tool, right? And then on the other hand, we're talking about DevOps. And from the, places that I've been at, the sales and marketing team is not necessarily going to know or want to have anything to do with any type of DevOps project, right? If they could be running things off of their laptop in Excel or whatever, they probably would and would have nothing to do with somebody like me. So I'm just wondering, what are kind of the target audiences of these different tools?
Well, that's changed over the years. So I think that's important to realize. So the Salesforce has evolved over the last, let's say, 8 or 9 years into an enterprise platform. So it's more like an application delivery platform than a pure CRM than it was in the past. And also, if there are several customers out there, Salesforce customers out there who are spending in excess of $100 million a year on Salesforce. And kind of the minimum for a Fortune 500 type company, the minimum expenditure is in the tens of millions. So because of that, a lot of the responsibility for maintaining Salesforce has moved off of the departments and into the office of the CIO. So I think that's part of the explanation for why people care about DevOps is in Salesforce now. And it may have been taken out of the hands of some of the departmental leaders because that they want to increase efficiency. But I think, Jillian, you're right that everybody, there are lots of people out there who could care less about DevOps and really want to use Salesforce kind of like what they've been telling you, how they've been telling you to use it.
Yeah, I thought it was a marketing tool. I thought it was like a more robust, like HubSpot or something. Right?
Yeah.
And contractor thing, and I have like Harvest and HubSpot for emails. I thought that it was a fancier version of that, and now I'm finding out that I was so wrong as I am.
Well, you're not. Of course, you're not wrong, but I mean, there's just it's more like they want it to be bigger. And the other thing to appreciate about Salesforce is that when they're in a big company selling, their number one goal is to have multiple clouds, as they call it. So they have their sales cloud, their marketing cloud, their commerce cloud. Now they have data cloud. Now they have, all these other things that are kind of all designed to work. Well, actually, they're not well designed to work together. Dirty little secret out there, and they're trying to make them all work together. They're actually rewriting some of them.
Doing their best.
They are, I'm a critic of them, and I always like to, have a little empathy in my criticism. But they're trying. They're trying to do that. But I think they definitely want the attention on their product to be at the CIO level. And a lot of vendors now are in the Salesforce ecosystem are kind of like turning their sales pitches in that direction. Where before the sales pitches used to be more in a land and expand kind of philosophy, so that they would be pitching to the trailblazers, would be pitching to the sales managers, would be pitching to, the people who are actually using these products more. But the pitch has definitely turned more to the CEO, CIO level pitch. And and also let's look for a minute at where DevOps is most prominent in Salesforce. And it's almost always in a critical application. So there's a Salesforce partner out there called Encino, N-CINO. And they are a multi-billion-dollar valuation public company that runs on top of Salesforce. And what they do is banking. So will do financial transactions and banking service. So you can imagine that the people who are running Encino installations definitely want DevOps, right? Because they definitely want to be able to have a record of all the changes they made to their system. They want to have validation protocols. They have QA protocols, and they have to sustain them. And there's actually a DevOps company that's pretty much devoted to that one sector, and it's called AutoRabbit. It's a cute name, huh?
Yeah, I like it.
Their annual conference is called DevHops.
Good on them. Yeah, good job.
Yeah, I like AutoRabbit. They have some great people there, and they're very rigorous in terms of the security aspects that often gets folded into Salesforce DevOps too, like static security analysis and other things like that. So yeah, I think the reason why there's been a transition from Salesforce being kind of this SaaS platform that you just use to being something that has to have like a change management process associated with it is mainly the introduction of critical applications into it. There was another product used to be on Salesforce called Viva. You may have heard of them. They're a big, another giant software company who services the pharmaceutical industry. So, like I used to work at Genentech, and it totally reminds me of what we're doing is kind of like the software QA and validation that we had to do for the FDA. Like at Genentech, we had to like have a protocol for how we did all the rat lab weighing, so that we could produce that protocol to the FDA and say, this is how we weighed all the rats. And a similar thing happens with software too, right? So that's where this kind of culture came from, I think, and it's now been extended more into Salesforce.
So what are the in my experience, very few people who really need DevOps know that DevOps is the thing they need. So what does a conversation look like for you when you're talking to people that clues you in to say, oh, here's what you're missing. Here's what this problem is describing to me.
I think it's release management problems.
Yeah.
That's the other essentially equivalent description for what the field is in Salesforce, because like I mentioned before, there is so many speed bumps and roadblocks to developers to get this going. So if what a lot of these products do is they offer you CI/CD pipeline automation as well. So they kind of give you a clicky interface to let you do pipelines. And again, it's more compatible with the Salesforce Trailblazer kind of profile to have that. So I think it's a common pain point in almost every Salesforce shop that does customization is this. And they also know that the vendor ecosystem is out there to service them, because if you're part of the whole Salesforce, Dreamforce World Tour thing, all of their outbound communication and their partnership programs and everything, there are companies like Capado and Gearset and Flowsum, and all these companies are upfront, in terms of their partnership. And Salesforce actually has investment relationships with some of these, like Capado, and the Salesforce frequently recommends them to solve problems for big people. So I think people realize that release management in Salesforce is still broken, still a lot of problems with it, and you probably need some vendor help to help you get through it.
Yeah, I'm sure, just thinking about it from a Salesforce perspective, how they started and where they got to now, you're dealing with 30 years of legacy code. And now you're like, oh, hey, let's do this new thing. I would imagine that's not an easy implementation.
No, it's not. It's I think you get a lot of some of these tools are bought, not used.
Yeah.
That shelfware is a big problem in Salesforce ecosystem. I think people are always looking for solutions to this kind of thing, and especially if you have that external pressure of like a QA officer or somebody like that in your organization who's going to be looking down your shoulder, or if you have external regulatory concerns or things like that. I think that really is the dividing line. I think of all these companies, like I would say there's about it's something like about $1 billion market, I think, for all the software and services for Salesforce DevOps. So that might be a little bigger than
Wow.
than people have thought. I think about a quarter of that is software, and about 3/4 of that would be services from people like Accenture or whoever, global system integrators or consultant houses that frequently come in and do this kind of thing. So I think the other thing that I think we want to talk about today, and we can kind of switch subjects a little bit here, is like 3 years ago, I wrote this blog post where I predicted that SaaS DevOps was going to be a thing. And I recently was talking to one of my old customers, Opsera, and they're out there really trying to make this SaaS DevOps thing work. And here's the thing that they've noticed talking to customers now is that at the CIO level, or maybe at the center of excellence level, you do have a lot of people now thinking about how to manage every business platform in their company. So you have I've heard some crazy numbers, like if you're a Fortune 500, you have maybe up to 1,000 different applications running in your organization. And maybe if you're a department, you might have 50 different online apps or SaaS apps that you could be using for this kind of thing. So I think the same kind of momentum that we saw in Salesforce, where it becomes more critical, it becomes more widespread, it becomes harder to manage. So it kind of rolls up to the CIO level for concern. This is happening with other products as well. Obvious ones like SAP for HANA or like Oracle ERP or something like that is one of them. But even things like Jira or things like HubSpot or things like Zendesk is a big one. So people, there's a thing out there now that I think kind of goes hand in hand with the platform engineering movement, actually, that CIOs want some sort of universal business platform system that they can use to do that. And I've seen various Salesforce DevOps companies, just a handful of them have been successful. 2 of them, one is Salto, another one is Opsera, to kind of do this, to have like a low-code user interface to do SaaS DevOps on different application products. But I kind of have a feeling that IT managers are looking for this solution right now, that they want to have a universal application to be a digital twin manager for all of their different SaaS products.
Yeah, for sure. There's a big risk factor there as well, because we pretty rapidly ran to the SaaS world, and now in hindsight you can look back and say, oh wait, all of our business critical data is not ours, it's sitting in a SaaS somewhere. And so number one, how do I manage the control and permissions in that? And also, what's the blast radius when that SaaS provider gets hacked?
Oh, right. Yeah. I mean, there's all kinds of security and safety considerations and data governance and retention problems there. I think a lot of people are kind of over the idea of the SaaS data being stored in somebody else's computer being not your data. I think that most people have an export capability, and I think that the success of SaaS is kind of like an indicator that people are getting over that. But I think they definitely want to have some way to consolidate DevOps sprawl in their organizations, because this is, I think, something you're seeing that goes along with these separate business systems. So if you're going to have a Salesforce DevOps team, you're going to have an SAP DevOps team, you're going to have maybe a Jira DevOps team. So I think that if you're a CIO and you're trying to consolidate tool usage and trying to get people to work together better, I think that the looking at how you now have release management processes and critical infrastructure processes associated with these SaaS products, that there's a SaaS DevOps discipline that could be developed around this that would consolidate and systematize your ability to manage all these things.
Yeah, it almost strikes me as very similar to back in the 90s when you were doing desktop configuring, like, and you were building, like if you had a Salesforce of 200 people, you only made it through the first 2 or 3 computers before you were looking for some way to automate it. And then that took you into the world of like modifying the Windows registry and all of that kind of stuff. It feels very similar to that.
Oh yeah. Like, in other words, taking a bunch of crazy configurations and trying to manage them under one roof.
Yeah.
That's
BioLinux. That's story there. It's BioLinux.
Well, I think that's where we all ended up, but now here we are facing the same problem again.
No, I just remember, like, a certain team trying so hard to get all the bioinformatics applications bundled with one distro of Linux, and I don't know, they really tried. Okay, you guys, they tried. They gave it their best. And that was BioLinux, and that was my job to manage that for like a year.
BioLinux,
yeah. It was like I think a distribution of Ubuntu that just had a lot of bioinformatics software pre-installed. So it had like R and Blast and all like the genomics all the top genomics software at the time. You could, I don't know.
Well, sounds like a project.
Very small genome, I guess. I don't know.
That was a while ago, I think.
That was a while ago. Yeah.
Yeah.
We were talking about desktop management, and that was my job for a little bit, was to install BioLinux on all the new scientist computers.
So do you think companies like Salesforce have a roadmap of taking this problem in-house and bundling it as part of Salesforce, or do you think they're going to rely on the external vendors and support them in solving it?
I think the solid answer is the external vendors are the ones to rely on. I think because of generative AI, I think that there will be disruption, though, in DevOps right now. And I think maybe a year ago, there was a rumor going around, or it might have been just a hope from the Capado people that Salesforce might buy Capado. And after they bought Own Backup recently, that for over $1 billion, that so that possibility came up again. But if I was, if I was an advisor for Salesforce on this, I would say maybe try to hold off on that, because this DevOps is going to be highly disrupted by AI. I think, like for example, I was telling you the story about the digital twin, for example. So if what that required to create was to ingest all of the metadata from a Salesforce org and then create a structure around it so that you could then use it, traverse it in some way, like a graph database, for example. And you can actually achieve that same functionality now by simply ingesting all of the XML metadata and just putting it in a giant blob or rag or into an organized semantic database is the better way to do it. And then you can use an LLM to get the same result. So you can use an LLM to find the blast radius for a proposed change without creating a graph database. So that means a new entrant in Salesforce DevOps can possibly have the same kind of capability that Elements Cloud and Panaya and a few of these others have to find the blast radius with almost no coding.
Oh, right on. Okay.
So this is just one example of the revolutionary capabilities of AI when it comes to DevOps. So I have there was a company in Y Combinator's current batch called SRE.ai. There's an intriguing URL. And they're doing Salesforce DevOps with natural language. So you would be able to give it a command like take a deployment from sandbox A and deploy it to user testing sandbox B, just with a command like that, just with natural language. And I think that the listeners here kind of understand how potent that would be, because that would invoke a whole pipeline process. And also what this company claims they can do is repair errors that occur in the pipeline. So, self-healing kind of capabilities with that, which is the thing that AI seems to be really great at in terms of root cause analysis for errors. So I think to answer your question, I think that they may have been thinking about acquiring Capado or one of the other ones maybe a year ago, because it is an obvious thing and they're kind of moving out of this no acquisitions phase that they were in. Mm-hmm. But I think right now the field is up for grabs. Honestly.
Yeah, for sure. No, I see that because in the model you just described, like the capabilities of using an LLM to do that would just dwarf the capabilities of any team trying to do it by forcing people to follow procedures and policies. Yeah.
And I think also it's just the code generation aspect of AI as well that I think that's considered to be part of Salesforce DevOps now. Salesforce has an agent that lets you, or I should call it a Copilot, works kind of like GitHub Copilot, even though Mark hates Copilots, they still got some. They still have the capability to generate code and that kind of thing, and that's part of DevOps, but I don't think that they're going to be supporting it very much, honestly. And I try to get into that because the publisher of Salesforce DevOps.net, it's kind of like my job to figure out for the community, where the solutions are going to come from. And, like they have a product called Salesforce DevOps Center, and it's kind of terrible. It hasn't been updated. There's they have a very sluggish pipeline of features that they're putting in. If you're aware of how Salesforce operates internally politically, you kind of realize that this is a kind of like a group that's sitting in a non-revenue position within Salesforce. So they have no product that you could put a revenue number on. So if you don't have that in Salesforce, you're at a disadvantage.
Right.
Got to be making the money. It's in the name.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that this, like, one thing I like to compare Salesforce and Microsoft in this respect. And I think Microsoft, for me as a developer, as somebody who uses tools and was looking for things to put together all the time, Microsoft does it right. You know, what they basically, they're going to create an API, create an interface, and they're going to service the developers first. They're going to make sure the developers have all the tools in order to create these applications. And Salesforce does it kind of backwards. They're going to make sure that the Trailblazers have all the tools to do the clicky thing first. But then, then the DevOps capabilities, or the Apex coders, or even a Flow coder capability is added later. You know, they got to get this functionality out the door that people can buy, and it's that mentality that, you know, it's just kind of like a gigantic difference in the founders between Bill Gates and Mark Benioff. You know, that you have, you know, somebody who wants to create tools that developers can use, and that's not the mentality at Salesforce. So the DevOps industry is basically compensating for that.
Yeah, for sure. And that's been the pattern I've seen a lot in my career in startups. You have two types of startups from that perspective. You have the ones who are just like ship it, or the ones who think about the long term, you know, how do we support this? How do we configure it? How do we maintain it? And are a little more deliberate in the delivery. But I tend to lean towards the former with just ship it, because odds are, from a startup perspective, odds are your product's going to fail. So you want to fail as quickly as possible. And in the off chance that it doesn't fail, well, now you've got money. And with money, you can pretty much solve all the bad decisions you made early on.
Well, yeah, that's I tend to agree. I mean, I think my inclination as a developer is to kind of go down the wrong road here, which is to make it perfect.
Right. Yeah.
You know, I think I kind of have that OCD, ADD thing that a lot of developers have, which is, you know, oh, but if I just get this one thing, get the speed going, you know, cut out this one thing, it'll be perfect and everybody will buy it. And then the problem is you always find some other thing to fix.
For sure. Yeah.
After that, you get
Always
into
problems.
Yeah, always new problems. And I think you're right, is you got to ship the thing. You got to get customers. You got to have your MVP out there. You got to, talk to people. And yeah, you can fix bad design decisions later.
For sure. So what is this changing landscape look for you? If we use the Wayne Gretzky analogy of go where the puck's going to be, where are you lining up for this?
Oh, well, I'm interested in cognitive DevOps. No, that's kind of the thing.
I hadn't heard that term before, but I kind of like it.
Yeah, that's my term, cognitive DevOps.
I like it.
Glad to have a point here.
I call it, that's what SRE.ai is doing, is cognitive DevOps. I think that the other thing that's happening for sure, and I talk to all these companies, I talk to Salesforce, is this agent concept I think it's a little more real than any other part of the generative AI revolution that we're now in the third year of, I guess. The reason why is because there's some serious programming and development behind these things. It's not just the LLMs. You've got multi-stage LLMs. You've got an LLM that does the planning. Then you've got other LLMs that do the actions, for example. And then you've got other ways to kind of conceive of this. And I think the most interesting way to conceive of this is what I call the virtual employee paradigm. And I think that this is where it's going to go. I think that you're going to have the agents and this is going to happen in DevOps too. So you're going to be able to hire a virtual employee that functions like your Salesforce admin, that you're going to be able to communicate with the VE like a business person. Like you are able to express your business needs to this your Salesforce admin VE, and then that Salesforce admin VE will actually use RPA or whatever it needs to do to actually operate the software to implement those changes and to manage it for you. So I believe that most of the DevOps companies have a project working on this right now.
Yeah, I can see that being very realistic, because when you think about the common hands-on tasks that happen in DevOps, it's, create a Kubernetes pod with these images and configure a database and add that database connection string to this parameter, which are all things that are very much within the capabilities of an agent like that.
Right. Yeah, it's essentially, I think the way these VEs are going to go is they're going to replace entry-level employees first.
Yeah.
So that's just the kind of thing you would give to your DevOps trainee, right?
Right.
And that so they're going to be a joy and a boon to senior people like us, that know how to use all these, know what needs to be done, and can just give out the instructions like you're talking to a junior person on your team. And that, by the way, gets into the public policy aspect of this AI business. Is what's going to happen to all the entry level jobs, and
for sure,
what's going to happen to all that kind of stuff. So I don't want to be just blithely talking about virtual employees without mentioning that there's obviously a public policy, human impact to this. And I think it's if you're a young DevOps person right now, I have nothing to say other than I'm kind of worried.
Yeah.
About that because I think that you look at this VE thing, and something that you can associate with that is what I call VE economics. And essentially, if you can hire, let's say you needed 20 of these DevOps junior people in your giant company. Well, you're going to start experiencing some economies of scale that you won't experience with people, right? So on the 20th one of this, you're going to get a big discount from whatever service provider that you're getting this from. So there's kind of like new economic laws that are happening here, and one of them is the law of infinite scale. The basically you take away the profit margin, and you have a service provider like Salesforce, and they'll be happy to provide you all of these agents or virtual employees at a discount. So now you've got the prospect of being able to grow your headcount without a linear increase in expenses. So this basic property of VE economics, I think, is what's going to drive this forward. Is that this is something that CEOs get immediately,
right?
And that they're what does the CEO do? They manage their workforces. They manage resources. They take inputs and outputs. They think in terms of profit and loss. They are extremely interested in this. Like I've talked to the Agentforce rollout from Salesforce in September was definitely changed the landscape in terms of their sales right now. That I've been talking to system integrators and consultants, and they're getting calls from their CIOs basically because their CEOs are saying, hey, I saw what Mark is talking about. I get this VE economics thing. Get me some of these virtual employees as quick as possible. And so we're seeing a different shape of demand right now. Mm-hmm. And I was talking to another one of these cognitive DevOps companies, and they're actually going in there making the sale based on what their customer is paying a Salesforce admin. So this, to me, is kind of revolutionary because it implements what people are calling the service as a software model. And what that means for the software industry is that not only are you able to let's say, get budget out of an existing IT budget, but now you're able to get budget out of an existing human resources budget.
Yeah, for sure. That's crazy. And that just, that gives you, you refer to it in sales a lot. It gives you stickiness because now you can bring multiple decision makers in and create compelling arguments for each of those. That's wild.
Yeah. It is wild. I think so. Where am I looking for things to go? I think I'm sticking with the DevOps thing. Cognitive DevOps, I think, is going to be a huge disruptor. I think that they're going to slowly get into this area, and I think that we're going to have pretty soon. You're going to have virtual employees, let's say within 2 years, I'd say, who would be able to manage a release management process all completely on their own. So that would be tremendous in terms of automation and time savings for the Salesforce admins that are left to do that.
Yeah, that is crazy disruptive when you think about kind of all the industries that could be applied for. Like, it wasn't too long ago that we had, secretaries and things to help with scheduling, and now we have virtual calendars that can do all that. And I think AI is on just a completely different scale than even these kind of revolutionary technologies that we've already seen, like virtual calendars and a word processor. Like, being a word processor used to be people's jobs as well.
For sure.
I don't know. It's got to be scary to be a young person in who's coming into the industry now, or is thinking about coming in. Sure, it's scary for everybody else too, but I would be especially scared as the young people because of what you said about the entry-level jobs, like just being obliterated by AI.
Yeah, I'm really concerned about that. As a policy prognosticator, I definitely see a problem there. I also, I see this VE economics as like a giant sucking sound, out there, that CEOs are locked in. I think it only took them a few months to get locked in on this thing. And like here in Silicon Valley, I couldn't think of a single young entrepreneur who isn't thinking about who isn't dreaming about building their company this way as well. So, and I think that they're getting tremendous encouragement from the venture capitalists. Also, this VE economics story, if you bring it to the table as a startup entrepreneur and you are able to latch onto that, I think that is a story that just instantly sells with investors as well. So I think we're about, basically another thing I like to say is we have not reached the peak of expectations of generative AI yet. So there was a talk that maybe we had hit the trough of disillusionment. Of course, I'm referring to the Gartner hype cycle graph here. And people thought we'd hit the trough of disillusionment with the enterprise AI this past summer. And I never felt that way because of the conviction that I have on the subject, which, here's a simple reason why I have conviction. And I'm sure you've heard this example before, but let's say you've got a pile of 10 legal briefs and you need a lawyer to kind of examine those in the context of a case you're working on. That would have taken, the cheapest lawyer you could have hired in the Philippines or whatever for $75 an hour to do something like that. That would have cost you, $300 or $400. And now that costs you 3 or 4 cents to do the same thing. And that's actually a reliable application that I'm referring to here. And where the hallucinations are not that much of a problem, and you can do things to manage it. So when you've got anything that's like a 3 or 4 order of magnitude change in economics, to me, that's like an inevitable force. It's similar to like the distribution of paper catalogs. What happened to that in the 90s? Because it was literally 1,000 times cheaper to send that stuff around the world as a PDF than, over the internet than to actually print and distribute it. So I think this is why I have conviction on AI is that kind of basic cognitive change. And that's actually one of the second economic laws I've kind of been working on, which is, the ability to have cognitive scale, that you can do things with AI that was previously not possible, or was so expensive you couldn't do it all the time. That you can now do it with AI. So that's where I think it's going, and I think it's generally good. Because like the abundance side of this equation of this idea is that if we make it easier to build software, more software will get built.
Right.
Too. So that's another thing. There's the Mark Andreessen quote where he says software will eat the world. Well, according to Gartner, they're only about 30 or 40% done. Really. So like if you look at the cloud migration, there's still got more than half of corporate data is still on-prem. So I think it's, there's a long way to go with this stuff. And I'm pretty sure that cognitive DevOps is probably going to be one of those things that kind of like seeps into the background and we take for granted 3 or 4 years from now.
For sure. And I do want to, like for all the young listeners listening to the show who are still early in their career, I want to give them some hope and not send them away from the episode going, well, damn, that was a buzzkill. So, we've seen this in the past, not exactly like this, but we have seen, like Jillian was mentioned, there used to be a career called word processor. Like you were mentioning, Vernon, you used to have people who ran the printing presses for printing paper catalogs, and we saw the outsourcing movement.
When I was a kid, like right. I just wanted to know, like that was a job.
Yeah, and we had the outsourcing movement of the 90s and early 2000s of outsourcing the tech jobs in the U.S. to other countries. So there's patterns, there's historical patterns you can look at if you're still early in your career and see what happened. Where did those people who were displaced, where did they go? And then see if there's some parallels here in this type of movement. And, back to the Wayne Gretzky quote, start steering your career in that direction.
Yeah, I think you got to move up the application stack, essentially. You have to, I think the thing that folks like us are gifted at is to be able to understand capabilities and marry them to problems.
Right.
So you need to be, I think we're going to have fewer people in IT is definitely a thing, but I think that we're going to be doing more good work. And we're going to be doing more work that's actually tied to whatever the enterprise that you're working for does. Because it's, we're all familiar with the Phoenix Project, right? It's amazing how many dysfunctional IT organizations there are out there. Where you have people who have no idea why they're doing something.
Right.
They have no idea that, like working on this weird Salesforce problem is somehow going to help the company. Like they can't translate that into that. And I think what's got to happen in our profession is we have to become more aligned with business.
For sure.
And so I think that if we're able to use tools like AI and cognitive DevOps to remove us from some of the daily grind of this and some of the drudgery that goes along with IT, then I think we're making progress. And we have the ability to expand out talent so that young talent can use their imagination and their new ways of thinking and other gifts of youth to, participate in the economy more in terms of constructing solutions and working more where the rubber meets the road in a particular organization. I think we're just like, don't have elevator operators, don't have buggy whip makers. We might not have more DevOps engineers in the future. We might have fewer of those because of automation. But I think the people, if you're looking to marry your love of technology, your ability to see solutions, your imagination to pull things together, I think that there's a lot of business people who would love to hear from you.
For sure. There's always going to be problems that don't have solutions. And one way to look at this is you can shift your daily grind from solving the problem of why doesn't this Docker container build to a higher level problem of something that the customers of the company you're working for are going to value.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I always try to give that advice to, whenever I'm working with students or talking to young people, be very wary of putting yourself in a position where you don't know why you're doing what you're doing. Always try to, kind of move up the ladder to the decision makers, talk to the people who are actually using the product that you're creating, if that's what you're doing, or that kind of, the equivalent in sort of whatever job it is that you have. Because if you can keep identifying problems, you can keep having a job for the most part, is at least what I've found. And obviously, that's not always a perfect strategy, but I think it's much better than kind of sitting in your corner and saying, I'm going to be the best Python or Go developer of all time, right? Like that's maybe not the best goal. It should be instead, I want to solve this problem. And then there are always new problems, you guys, always, all the time. Right. They never end. Like they never stop. So
no,
there you go. That's my uplifting advice. There's always new problems, always.
Right. And I think also it took a lot of resources and a lot of capabilities to solve some of these problems with IT in the past. And now you could do it with less. So I agree. I think that there are more problems to be solved always. And I think that we're going to have a different kind of flatter world when it comes to doing this. I think there's going to be fewer middle managers, fewer people trying to function as gatekeepers, because we're going to have, assistants to help us with some of this stuff.
For sure.
So that's where I think it's going. If you want to aim your puck in the right direction, I think it's for that.
Awesome. Well, what do you think? Should we move on to picks? Jillian, what'd you bring for us?
So I'm going to go with the shameless self-promotion this week. I am opening up, I don't know, maybe 5 to 10 spots for an AI product that I have now that we've, had this nice end of the show on how AI is going to take all the jobs and things. Let me take some jobs away from your company. No, I'm just kidding. It's cool stuff. It's cool stuff to empower your scientists to do different tasks. The most frequent one that I see is to be able to do literature text mining and throw thousands of papers at it, and then to be able to get some type of information. I work in drug discovery, so it's mainly drug discovery. I do have an article on that. It's called Using LLMs to Query PubMed Knowledge Bases for Biomedical Research. And kind of like what it says, you can query PubMed, you can throw all of your papers at the AI, and then you can tell the AI, please summarize this for me. So it's a product that I have that gives you a chat GPT like interface that your scientists can use, but it's all self-hosted on AWS, so none of your data gets out. If you have proprietary data, if you have preclinical data, all that kind of stuff, or other data science companies that I don't know what you all are doing, but it might be useful for you too. I don't know. So anyways, it's got the chat GPT like interface, and then it's also got a programmatic interface that you can use wherever you have a terminal, SageMaker, HPC, wherever all the things are. That'll be on my website, dabbleofdevops.com/AI, if anybody's interested in that and would like to try it out.
Right on. Awesome. Vernon, what'd you bring for a pick?
Well, I got my website, salesforcedevops.net, and invite everybody to come by there. Like I said, I'm also on LinkedIn. Vernon Keenan, altogether is my thing on LinkedIn. And I would just my pick is I want people who are complaining about Salesforce DevOps or have complaining about the pricing models and things like that to contact me, because I'm trying to gather input.
Right on.
Awesome. You could start like a support group. That could be your like
it is
it's just we're gonna get all these people and we're all gonna have like snacks and fuzzy blankies and just talk to each other.
It is. That's what I'm trying to create, is just a comfort group where we can all complain and give each other let us know that Salesforce is not paying attention to us in this thing. So but it'll start out with a fine counseling session with me to get all your complaints. But, yes. Yes. I'm trying to, be the trailblazer whisperer here. So the more trailblazers who contact me to tell me about their problems with Data Cloud and Agentforce, the better.
Right on. Awesome. All right. My pick. This might be one of the wildest things I've ever picked, but with the holiday season coming up, if you're looking for a gift for someone, and they are a male, I'm going to suggest Shinesty underwear, which, all right, it's hard to get excited about underwear. And I was pretty skeptical at first, but I used these. I ended up with some and used them extensively a year or so ago when I was training to run a 100K ultra marathon. So ones I had were.
I would just like to say that is crazy. 100. Okay. Anyways, carry on.
So I'm just going to say my Shinesties are battle tested, and they have performed well. So yeah, that's my pick, and that's probably the one that's going to get me kicked off of this podcast. But you'll have a pair of Shinesties to take it. Take away
Shinesties. Boxers or briefs?
I like the long leg briefs. Just the support factor.
Mm-hmm. Okay, we're getting into the chafing aspect of the podcast.
The 100K.
Good anti-chafing.
Absolutely.
Hey, Will and Jillian, this is fantastic.
Vernon, I really appreciate having you on the show. This was great. Thank you so much for joining us, and feel free to come back and chat with us again at any time. We can do this later and see how our predictions went.
Yes. We'll see how my little mission to fix Agentforce pricing goes.
Right on.
That's my current mission, because nobody knows how much it costs. So
right on. Look forward to it.
That's a big problem. So okay, and great.
Yep. To the listeners, thank you guys all for listening. Appreciate having you support the show, and we'll see y'all next week.